in my home state of Florida with thousands of loyal, hardworking American patriots. This is some crowd.
As you can hear there, a very excited crowd at Cecil Airport tonight as President Donald Trump made Jacksonville one of his latest campaign stops this evening. One of 3 trips he made along the Atlantic coast from Charlotte to Jacksonville, and now we understand he is in Miami. Thank you for joining us tonight at 11. I'm Anthony Austin.
And I'm Jeannie Blaylock. The president's visit was his first to Jacksonville since he launched his re-election campaign for this November's election. We're looking at some pictures here that one of our viewers sent in tonight. From all different angles, you can see there were lots and lots of people there. And as we've been talking about this week, they were not required to wear masks because, according to Jacksonville's protocol, masks are optional outside. And this was an outside rally, but the weather held out. He was about 20 minutes late coming in from Charlotte, but the crowd was enthusiastic, spirited, and ready to see him tonight. Of course, there are opponents to President Trump, as you know, and we'll hear from them in just a moment. But we want to talk a little bit about what we heard from some of the people who were there. Some had camped out from the night before and were thrilled to hear the president speak. The campaign was not able to tell us the number of people who attended, but production for the event said the venue there could fit 15,000. When the president first came out, I heard him say, as he looked out on the crowd, at least 30,000 people were there, he was estimating in his speech tonight. As President Trump prepared to take the stage in Jacksonville tonight, his opponent, Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden, released a statement. Biden saying, quote, since President Trump's last visit to Florida just 2 weeks ago, over 40,000 more Floridians have tested positive for coronavirus, and the state marked 13,000 COVID-related deaths. So far, former Vice President Biden has not scheduled any in-person events in Jacksonville, although his campaign has highlighted Jacksonville in virtual events, including a back-to-school roundtable with his wife, Jill Biden, held with Duval County leaders. We should also note that Biden decided not to hold any campaign rallies tonight.